Welcome to our webinar about how to stand out and how to craft your unique personal statement. Let's now dive in. And before we talk about what personal statement is, I want to actually take my time to convince you that personal statement is indeed extremely important and that you should really prioritize personal statement, no matter if you're applying ED or RD. This is something that you really want to spend a lot of time on, starting from now or even before that. So let's look at the tweet by Harvard University. It is from 2022, but I believe the situation is the same, if not worse, in the recent years. So they're saying that in the recent admission cycle, there were 2,000 available slots at Harvard College, which means they can accept 2,000 students. Then there were 8,000 US applications with perfect GPA and about 20,000 people who scored above 700 on SAT reading and math, which would in total give more than 1,400, which is a very, very good score. So what you can tell from this tweet is that stats alone is not enough to get into top college, just because there are way more students with perfect stats than there are spots at the university. And of course, Harvard is a pretty extreme example because Harvard's acceptance rate is around 3%, and not every school is as this selective. But reality is most of US universities are quite selective, and especially if you are also from a low-income background and you need full scholarship or full financial aid, you'll be looking at top colleges because only they have a large budget to fund you guys. So if you're applying to selective universities, just know that GPA alone and stats alone are not enough, because apart from all these perfect students, you still have to stand out. And the best way to stand out is through your essays and, of course, your extracurricular activities. I won't talk about activities today because it's a whole separate topic and it's something that you need to work on for a long time. So even if I talk about it now, there's not that much you can do in the next 2 months. But essay is something you can definitely control and have a lot of improvement on. So we will dedicate today's session on a personal statement. So what is a personal statement? Personal statement is a 650 word essay where you have to convey your unique qualities, experiences, and you have to offer college an insight into who you are and what would be the potential impact on their community. The good thing about personal statement is that you only have to write it once, and it will be sent to all of the colleges on your list. Pretty much all of them, at least the colleges that use Common App, which is majority of the universities in the US, but not all of them. So always double check the application requirements on every single university's website. But again, you only write it once, which is really good because once you're done, you're done. But at the same time, it shows how important this essay is. And this essay has to be very reflective, very personalized, and very authentic. And how exactly you can do that, this is what we'll talk about today. So Common App essay prompts are the following. They have not changed in the last many, many years. So this is also good news for those who are perhaps applying next year. You can already start thinking about your essay because I almost guaranteed that the prompts will be exactly the same. So you can see them on the screen. I won't read all of them because you can probably do it yourself, but I want to focus your attention on the actual questions in every single prompt. For example, in prompt number 2, the question is, how did it affect you? And by it, I mean the challenge. And what did you learn from that experience? In prompt number 3, the question is, what prompted your thinking and what was the outcome? Prompt 4 is, how has this gratitude affected or motivated you? Prompt number 5, reflect on a period of personal growth and new understanding of yourself or others. So what you can notice among these questions is that they honestly have nothing to do with college, with your grade, with your academics, with your achievements, and they're very personal and very reflective. So by just looking at questions, you can tell that the college really cares about your values, your personality, your inspirations, your ambitions. So please keep this in mind. And you don't actually have to pick a prompt before you start writing an essay. In fact, what I recommend to my students is that you first figure out the topic and then you see if any of the prompts would align with that topic. And if you see one, then you can pick that. But if not, there is always an open-ended prompt, number 7, that basically says that you can share an essay on any topic of your choice. So you're truly not bound by these prompts. And I'm pretty sure that when admissions committee reviews the essays, they're not even looking at a prompt because honestly, it doesn't matter what you choose. There is no better prompt or worse prompt. These are just guidelines for you to help you reflect and figure out what would be a meaningful experience to share. Before we go into the exact steps of writing a personal statement, I would like to go over common mistakes. And some of you, and probably many of you, will see yourself in any of these mistakes, and that is totally fine. That's why they are common mistakes. Everybody makes them. Even people who eventually get into top universities, they still make these mistakes early on, but it's great that you're here because you can learn about them and you can make sure that you avoid them. But just please don't feel bad and don't feel like I'm calling you out. Just think of it as a lesson and make sure that you correct them. So the first mistake that is quite common for low-income international student is that they tend to complain or call for pity, which we also call sob stories or like trauma dumping, where essentially the whole essay is about how you had a very big challenge or hardship and how your life was very difficult and how you maybe faced financial difficulties or how you had no opportunities and how you're just this poor person who really needs help. And I feel for you. And it's true that you are in such a situation, but the harsh reality of college admissions is that they don't care, right? They're not your parent, they're not even your own government. So it's not their job to take care of you and to provide you with money in the form of scholarship. What they care about is attracting talented and motivated students who can bring something valuable to their community. So instead of calling for pity, you have to actually show that you are a very strong and talented candidate. So what people say is that you have to convert a sob story into a hero story, where you use that challenge or the difficulty you faced and you turn it into something that shows your personal growth and your strength. So when I read your essay, I don't feel bad for you, but in fact, I'm very inspired by your qualities, and I feel like you would be such an awesome addition to our campus. So please, please, please do not call for pity, but instead try to actually look awesome and try to feel like a person who can bring a lot of value. Common mistake number 2 is writing a resume with achievements. And this is what a lot of high-performing students do who have really high GPA, really high test scores, they won Olympiads and competitions, and they feel like they need to highlight that in the essay. But it's wrong because you already have other parts of the application for it, right? You guys all have Common App accounts, and you know that there is a whole extracurricular section with 10 slots. There's also honors and awards section. There's the courses section. There's additional information section. There is so much space for you to talk about achievements and how amazing and awesome you are. But personal statement is the only space for you to dig deeper beyond the achievement and talk about, again, your personality and your values. I will keep repeating these terms all the time. So don't repeat something that they already know, and don't try to be this perfect candidate because that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for humans with interesting personalities, but they're not looking for somebody who's like, I'm perfect, I have everything figured out, I have never been wrong. That is not a type of person that you want to be around, right? So don't be afraid to show vulnerability and lessons that you've learned. Number 3 mistake is writing about controversial topics. So the definition of controversial topics might be different for different people, but 2 kind of universally agreed topics are politics and religion. And I'm going to say that I have seen good essays about both of these topics, but it is quite dangerous. It's just because you never know who's going to read your essay. And when it comes to politics and religion, people get quite triggered by these topics. And because you don't know who's going to read it, you don't know what that person's reaction might be to your essay. And if maybe their political views are not aligned with yours, you will just not make a good impression, even if the essay is good. So unless you absolutely want to write about it, I would avoid these topics because there's plenty of other topics that don't have this danger of triggering someone. Number 4 is, oh my God, please do not use ChatGPT to write your essay. I have seen it last year, I'm seeing it this year, and honestly, this is just doing you a disservice. First of all, it's so obvious, you guys. Maybe it's not obvious for you because you've only read your own essay and you think that it sounds amazing, but for people like me and admissions officers who have read hundreds, if not thousands of essays, it is very easy to tell. Because AI is not personalized. AI is generic. Whoever uses ChatGPT, you're using the exact same system. So if you're saying, oh, write about this, it's going to give the exact same output. So it's pretty much impossible to make a personalized essay with ChatGPT. And there are also very clear terms that ChatGPT uses, like tapestry of knowledge, unwavering determination, and even specific sentence structure, where I could look at an essay for 1 minute and I can tell that it was AI generated. So first of all, you can't fool the admissions committee. They're smart. They also probably have technology because again, you're applying to these universities with billion-dollar endowment funds. You have amazing resources, amazing CS programs, and I'm pretty sure they found a way to detect it, even if they're not being open about it. So just, I won't talk about it again, but I feel very strongly about it. Please don't try to do it and don't try to outsmart admissions officers because they're very smart. All right, number 5 is not writing about cliched and overused topics. And I'm going to give you the list of these topics in the next slide. And the reason you don't want to write about them is because even if it's a good essay, it won't help you stand out. And the main purpose of the essay, as I mentioned, was to stand out, right? So you really want to be unique and share something that will make you memorable. And mistake number 6 is, of course, procrastinating and starting late. So I don't want to stress you out, but if you are planning to apply early decision and you have no idea what you want to write about, you need to hurry. I wouldn't say you're very late, but you are kind of getting to a stage where it will be pretty stressful in the next couple of weeks. But better late than never, so let this be your sign to actually get to your essay from literally right after this call. So now let's talk about some of the cliche topics. And again, cliche topics are not bad. And there is a way to make a cliche topic interesting, but only if you have a unique take on this topic and you say something that is insightful and interesting and not very common. So for example, number 2, sports injury. A very cliche essay about sports injury goes like this. I have been playing football all my life, but at some point I got injured and I couldn't do it anymore. And then I lost my life's passion and then I had to redefine myself or I had to rediscover myself. And honestly, it can be a very, very good essay and it can share a lot about you, but it's something that so many other students can write because if you can imagine how many people do sports at high school, right? Like almost every single high school, even very poor schools, they have some kind of sports club or activity. And everyone who does sports could technically be injured. So all of these people could write the same essay that you can. And if that's the case, it is the opposite of unique and it is the opposite of standing out. Right? So have this mental exercise where you ask yourself, how many people could write the same thing that I'm writing? And if the answer is many, that's probably a cliche topic. Other examples of cliche topics is any health issue of a family member or your own. It is a volunteer or travel experience where you talk about how your mind has opened up, how your whole life changed, and how you now want to travel the world. Number 4 is dealing with any kind of bullying due to race or gender. Or number 5, being a third culture kid. That is very, very specific to international students. A lot of you guys have moved around a lot, or maybe you have immigrant parents, or maybe you're mixed race. So there are a lot of essays about like sense of identity and belonging. Again, you can make it interesting, but you have to really think about it. Number 6 is also quite common for international students, which is pressure from parents. And I especially notice it in essays of Asian students or like post-Soviet students. And as someone who has a post-Soviet mom, I totally get it. Like the academic pressure to succeed and pressure to be either a doctor or engineer or lawyer. But again, this is something that admissions officers have seen multiple times. And number 7, a topic that I have seen multiple times is something about like performing on doing public speaking and gaining confidence through it. So again, if you want to write about one of these topics, it's totally fine, but you have to find a more unique approach and something that is not that common for other people. So now let's talk about how you would actually write an essay. And this is where I want you guys to actually participate in the chat. So step number 1 is that you want to reflect and you want to come up with a certain bank of ideas. At the end of the day, you only need one idea, but usually your first idea will not be perfect. So you want to have multiple options. You just want to get in the mood of reflecting and thinking about your life so that this idea generation becomes very easy for you. So I want you right now to think about the points that you see on the screen and write in the chat 1 or 2 potential essay ideas. Again, you're not judging if it's good or not, if it's cliche or not. For now, just let your brain think and just pour out any potential idea that you could have. So think about, first of all, any pivotal moments in your life. Maybe you've moved to a different city, maybe you changed high school, maybe you found a new hobby, maybe you broke a bone, anything that is mildly important in your life that has happened. Number two, think about your main passions and interests. These make really, really good essays when you can really dive into why you're interested in that subject, what you want to do with it in the future, and how you want to acquire that passion. Number three, of course, any challenges that you've had to overcome. I know I talked in the beginning about not writing about sob stories, but you can write about a challenge if you focus on how you grew from it. So any kind of challenges you had to overcome, that is a potential essay idea. Next is you can think about any influential people you have met, either offline or online, or it could honestly be even a YouTuber that you really admire, or it can be your siblings or your parents. Next, you could think about any objects that you cherish, and objects make an amazing metaphor, and I'll talk about it later, but honestly, some essays that are centered around a treasured object are really, really creative. Or lastly, you could think about any books, songs, or artists that are meaningful to you. So I want everybody to take 1 minute and to write down in the chat a couple of ideas of what you could potentially write about. And it can be very simple. It's like, oh, I want to write about the time I moved from public school to private school. Or I want to write about the time that I discovered computer science. Again, no judging for now. I won't critique your ideas. Now you just want to think. Just put something out into the world. If it's very personal, of course, you don't have to share it, but there are 74 people in the chat, so I expect a lot more responses. Um, yeah, so I'm gonna wait and I will not move forward until more people share their ideas, all right? All right, we're getting a few ideas. Time was my biggest thief. Interesting. Shoes choice. Okay, very creative. Okay, being isolated from my friends. That sounds like overcoming a challenge. Okay. Love for sailing. That is awesome. Okay, amazing. This is very, very interesting to see how diverse your ideas are. And I hope it also helps you guys see that there's just so many potential topics you could write about. And I know that many students think that, oh, but my life is not interesting. You know, I've lived a pretty ordinary life. I haven't had any major dramatic situations happen to me. But no, your life is interesting. And honestly, some of the essays can be about a very mundane object, like your favorite cup or favorite TV show. And as long as you're just creative, you can truly make a great story out of anything. So yeah, awesome, awesome ideas. I love seeing them. Cool. I think you guys are getting it, and I want you to continue doing this, right? Don't stop on one idea. Take a little piece of paper, Notion, and continue thinking about it. So let's move on to reflection step number 2. Next, as you guys remember, I have mentioned the word values multiple times, and you actually have to figure out your core values. So values are essentially things that are very meaningful for you and kind of principles that you live by. And you can either Google list of core values, or you can also find them in our admissions guidance app in the Common App Essay Builder. And you can see a few values here on the screen. And you know, some people think that there are correct values and wrong values. That is just not the case. There are only your values, right? They can be, as you see on the screen, like collaboration, growth, generosity. They can be about courage. They can be about family. They can be about creativity. Again, there is no right or wrong value. There is just something that you care about. And it is extremely important to actually communicate these core values to the university. So the next exercise that, again, I'll give you maybe just 1 minute because it's quite simple. I want you to write in the chat 3 core values that you think you have. And if you need the list, you can just Google like list of core values. And there's quite a lot, but please write in the chat a list of 3 core values that you think you have. Right, ambitious, creative, curious. Awesome. These are great. Adaptability, curiosity, perseverance, ambition, community growth. ambition, community, freedom, courage, community, authenticity. All right, I think some of you guys should become friends because I'm seeing a lot of like common values between some of your responses. But it's honestly a very, very good way to make friends because if you know your core values are aligned, you will just get along really, really well. But yeah, all right. I'm seeing compassion, confidence, generosity, friendship, giving back. Awesome. That's definitely one of my values as well. Commitment, ambition, open-mindedness. Amazing. Impact. Perfect. So yeah, I want you guys to keep these core values in mind. And when you have written your essay, I want you to look back at it and see, okay, have these core values actually shown through my essay? Because that is another checkpoint or like mental exercise that you should do. And if your essay does not show core values, go back to it and make sure that it does, because this is one of the main reasons that you want to be writing this common and personal statement. And step number 3 of your reflection is when you go back to step 1, where you have found your key events or key like situation that happened to you, and you now want to ask the so what question. And so what question is basically, why should the admissions committee care about this? When they read it, they're like, so what? Like, why is it important? Why should I care about it? And this is the actual essence of reflection, where you're not just describing an event like I moved from private high school to public high school, but you're then reflecting on it and you're asking yourself the following question. For example, why was this experience significant? What did you learn about yourself from that experience? How did that experience shape your future goals? How does that experience connect to your core values that you have identified in step 2? Or did any of your beliefs change because of that experience, and how? So these are just some of the examples of questions that you can ask yourself. And as you can see, the whole exercise feels like journaling. Actually, that's a habit I have picked up maybe about like 2 years ago, and I do it on a very consistent basis. And I recommend everyone to pick up that habit because it just helps with your mental health, but also helps with your college essays, right? When essentially whatever happens to you, you always ask yourself, so what? Why is this important? What did I learn? What can I do with it? And this is where you go from just explaining the event to communicating your values and your lessons and your authenticity. So when you do this whole exercise, again, you list your events, you list your values, and then you ask the so what question, and you try to elaborate on every single event, and then you'll start seeing which event could turn into potentially interesting story. And it's fine that not all of them would, because that's why you have multiple options, but eventually you would come to a point where you have a very interesting event, but then you also have interesting and unique realizations. So you can screenshot these questions, or you can just maybe come up with your own, but always, always, always ask the so what question, right? So this was all on the brainstorming and reflection part. I hope that this helped, and I hope you guys can kind of move forward from I have no idea what to write about to having some potential ideas in your head. Now let's talk about the actual essay and potential essay structures. So there are 2 main structures that I have seen in college essay. And some people, I think College Essay Guide calls them narrative structure versus montage structure. But for me, in a more simple language, you basically decide whether your essay would be focused on one key event or multiple events. And if it's about one key event, it is usually about overcoming a certain challenge. And if it's about that, the following structure is what I recommend. First of all, you will have your introduction and hook, and I will dive into hook a little bit later. Then you want to introduce the challenge, essentially explain what exactly is the problem and what happened. Then majority of your essay would be spent on discussing how you actually overcame the challenge, what steps you took, how it got resolved, what was the outcome. Then the next 20% you would spend reflecting on that challenge. And again, going back to the question of why was this challenge significant? What did I learn from it? What will I take for my future life and career? And then you would end in conclusion, which is about 5%. So again, you don't have to follow the structure, but that's a pretty simple format that I think you guys should have no problem writing. And it does a very good job balancing all the important aspects of a common and personal statement. And the main thing here that I want you guys to pay attention to is that the challenge takes only 20%. And this is very, very important because a lot of people tend to stretch out the challenge for way too long, sometimes even up to 80%. And this is when the essay turns into sob story or like a complaining type of essay, when you're just like, oh, this was bad and that was bad, and then this happened and that happened. But it's like, no, no, no. Explain it briefly and then move on to what did you do? How did you overcome it? What did you learn? Right? So don't dwell on the challenge for more than 20% and move on to the positive sides and about what you learned from it. Okay, so that's the narrative or like the one event structure. But then some of you might want to talk about multiple events that could work for people who, first of all, don't have a big challenge that they want to talk about, or for people who are maybe more well-rounded and they want to talk about multiple aspects of their personality. This type is a little bit more difficult to write because there is no very clear progression from like challenge to overcoming challenge. So honestly, it's a little bit more difficult, and the structure I'm giving is a little bit more vague, but it will be up to you to figure out the best way to do it. But generally, you would still have the introduction and the hook, which would take about 5%. Then you would describe several events or situations or maybe hobbies that you want to talk about. And I gave an example of 3 because 3 is kind of a golden number. And within the 650 word limit, I've noticed that 3 is a good number where you can still give enough details on every single event and not rush through them. But of course, if you want to have 2 or you want to have 4, that is totally okay. This is again just general structure. So you talk about event number 1, event number 2, and event number 3, and each one of these would take about 25% of your essay. Then you would again have the reflection, which is very, very important. It would take about 15 to maybe 20%. And when you reflect, again, you want to make sure that you're tying all of the 3 events together and you're explaining why all of them were significant and maybe how what you've learned in event number 1 was applied to event number 2, and what you've learned in event number 2 was applied to event number 3, right? So they shouldn't feel disconnected, but they're still part of one essay. And then you would again have conclusion, which is about 5%. So again, the structure is a little bit more difficult, but totally doable. And I've seen great, great essays with multiple events structure. And I want to reiterate again that no matter which structure you choose, you have to make sure that your core values and personality traits are communicated. Okay, if they aren't, then you want to go back to the drawing board and you want to rewrite the whole essay. All right, so I hope that was clear on the structure. I'm seeing some questions. I'm gonna take them at the end of the session just to make sure that I actually cover all the parts that I want to discuss. But yeah, I'm keeping an eye on the chat, so I'll try to answer all of them. So now let's talk about what traits a good essay will actually have. And this is mostly about the body of the essay. First of all, is that a good essay would show a certain transformation, which is basically before and after. And in between those, there is a certain pivotal moment or usually a challenge, which is why, again, writing about a challenge or one event is a little bit easier because you have a very clear framework of before challenge, challenge and pivotal moment, and after challenge. But generally, you want to show a personal transformation. You want to go from I was not very confident to I became confident, from I had no passion in life and now I'm super passionate about dance, or from I had no friends and now I'm a social butterfly. And why this is important, because it just shows personal growth and it shows that you have a potential to improve, to learn, to grow. And this is something that you will continue doing in college. And it also shows a little bit of vulnerability because your before state is not perfect. This is where you don't have it figured out. This is where you're facing a certain challenge or hardship, but you are growing from it. So personal transformation and personal growth is very, very important in a college essay. And if you again look at the essay prompts, a lot of them do actually ask about that transformation. And just one note I want to make is that you want to make sure that the transformation is positive. It's like an upward slope, because I have seen a few essays where the person would actually go downward and talk about how, I don't know, they were super passionate about something and then they lost that passion and now they have no idea what to do with their life. And it's not the best because you're ending on a not very positive note. So you want to make sure that progression is always upwards and you show that you'll do even better as you go to college. So number 2 is that a good essay would balance storytelling with reflection. This go back to the essay structure where both of them had certain percentage dedicated to reflection, usually around 20%. So again, do not just explain what happened. I went here, I did this, he said that, but reflect on it because this is where you will show your values. And number three, yeah, communicate your core values. I feel like I've said it many times, so we'll move on. Number four is a good essay would provide unique and uncommon insights. And this is the part that will actually make your essay stand out among the crowd. So when we're talking about reflection, reflection sometimes could be very obvious and very common. For example, if you're writing an essay about being in a football team, and if your reflection is that working in a team is good and that working in a team helps you win, that's quite common and obvious lesson where, yes, it's a good lesson, but it's something that everybody knows and it's not that interesting, right? But let's say if you were writing about, again, football, and if you said, actually, what I learned is that sometimes you should ditch teamwork and you should actually be very selfish and you should take all the responsibility on yourself. And this is how you can achieve the goal of winning a competition. This is where it's a lot more interesting because this insight is uncommon. So I would feel like you are, again, having more unique insights, you're standing out and you're thinking unconventionally. So again, it's not something that you can do in all of the examples. Like sometimes the learning might sound a little bit common that, I don't know, friendships are good or that hard work is good. But whenever you can, try to add a little bit more spice and try to find some uncommon connections or uncommon insights, because again, this will make you stand out from all other people who are writing about similar topics. All right, number five is that a good essay would be very rich with details and anecdotes. And a rule that is very popular that maybe many of you heard about is called show, don't tell. And it's essentially about showing what happened and not just telling that it happened. And the way to do it is to really tell anecdotes. And anecdotes are essentially specific stories. So let's compare two examples. A very like non-show don't tell example would be something like, I have always been passionate about computer science. It's like, but what are the details? But imagine that instead of that you say something like, every day when I come after school, before I eat dinner, I sit on my desk and I touch my white new keyboard and I open my Dell laptop and it flashes with the black terminal where I start writing code. Right? It is a lot more vivid. There's a lot more details. And as a reader, I feel like I'm almost in the room with you and I can feel your keyboard and I can see your screen. And I can still tell that you're passionate about computer science because you're saying that every day you come home from school and you're coding instead of eating. But you're not just saying I'm passionate about computer science, but you're actually showing how you're passionate about computer science, right? So specific details and anecdotes are extremely important. And that's what's going to make your essay very engaging and unique. And number six is that a good essay will use clear language. Please don't use vocabulary that you don't understand. If you've learned a new SAT word 2 weeks ago, but you don't really know how to use it, don't. Remember that the common approximation statement is not judged on English writing skill. That's why we have TOEFL and IELTS with the writing section. Common approximation statement has to be clear, which means that language needs to be reasonable, vocabulary needs to be reasonable, and something that you could actually communicate in, like if you were to have an interview, would you be able to say the same things that you wrote? And if you can't, it's not very good. Your sentences should not be 5 lines long, where I don't even know where's the beginning of the sentence and where's the end. Keep it concise and keep it clear. Because admissions officers have hundreds of essays to read per day. And if they don't understand something, they're not going to go back and be like, okay, let me really try to understand what he's trying to say. No, they'll just move on. So it is your job to have clarity in your essay and just please don't overuse fancy language and give it to other people to read and be like, did you understand what I said from the first read? And if they didn't, go back to it and fix it, okay? So yeah, these are traits of a very good common approximation statement. Now let's talk about the hook. And the hook is basically the very beginning of your essay. And hook is very important because that is something that's going to draw the reader in and really give the first impression of your essay. And maybe you can make an analogy with movies. You know how if you don't know whether the movie is good, you would watch the first like 3 to 5 minutes, and that's when you would make a decision if you want to continue or not. It's the same with essays. Of course, they will still read the whole essay because it's their job, but the feeling towards that essay would be quite different based on how catchy and captivating the hook is. So here are a few examples of how you can make the hook interesting. First of all, you can share a very surprising fact. So in one of the essays that I actually found on the internet, so you guys can maybe find similar ones as well, the student wrote, "When I was in 8th grade, I couldn't read." That is a pretty surprising and I would say even shocking fact. Like, how are you in 8th grade? You couldn't read, and now you're applying to Stanford or like some other Ivy League university. That is something that makes me have so many questions, and I definitely want to continue reading the essay. Another type of a cool hook is some kind of vivid description. And that is similar to what I was saying about computer science, where instead of saying that you love computer science, you describe how you code. So this is an example of a student cooking where he's saying, or she, actually, I don't know who that is, the spaghetti burbled and slashed around the pan, and as I stirred it, the noises it gave off began to sound increasingly like bodily functions. So if you really zoom into this essay, it is about noodles, and it's not maybe that interesting or exciting, but the way it's written is very catchy because again, you feel like you're almost in the kitchen with this person. You can smell the noodle, you can feel it. And again, this is something that draws the reader in, where I feel like, oh, I'm so immersed in the situation and this environment that I want to keep reading and learning what's going to happen next. The third example is some kind of thought-provoking question. For example, when is it okay to eat animals? When I read the sentence, I'm like, oh, that is a very good question. First of all, I need to think about it myself. And second of all, I'm very curious what the student thinks about this question and what is the answer that she or he has. So this is something that makes me want to keep reading. And the very last example of a great hook is the peak of the story. And this is something that almost all of you can have, even if you don't have a thought-provoking question or a surprising fact. Essentially, this technique is when you zoom in to the most important peak of the story, like the moment with the most tension, where the stakes are the highest, and you literally open with that. And again, if you think about movies, maybe you can imagine like a movie where when the movie starts, they cut to a scene where like someone died or someone's jumping off the building, and it's very high tension, but you have no idea what happened. So they would show like a few seconds of that clip, and then they would be like, oh, 10 years before or like 2 days before, and they go to tell the actual story. So that is a similar technique when you zoom into the peak of the story, and then you would elaborate on what exactly happened. So this is an example of peak of the story. Sweaty from the hot lights, the feeling of nervousness and excitement return as I take my place on the 30-yard line. For 10 short minutes, everyone is watching me. Again, I'm very curious, like what is happening? Where is he? Why is everyone watching? What kind of situation is he in? And I probably won't know until the middle of the story. But again, this is something that keeps me very engaged because I'm like, oh, I really want to get to that point and I want to know what happened. Right? So there might be other examples of hooks, and if you have any, please share in the chat, or maybe you already have your essay and you want to share your hook, please feel free to do that. But here are just some inspirations for you. And yeah, just make sure that when you read your hook, you know that the person wants to keep reading and not fall asleep. Because again, admissions officers are reading hundreds and hundreds of essays. And imagine there it's like Friday, it is 4 p.m., they're very tired, and they open an essay that starts with, "Ever since I was little, I've been fascinated by computer science." That's pretty boring for anyone, not even an admissions officer. But if it starts with, "When I was 8, I couldn't read," I'm much more interested, right? So remember that admissions officers are human. They want to be entertained. They want to feel emotions. So give it to them. Okay, and lastly, I want to talk about metaphor. A metaphor or a simile is essentially a literary device that I'm sure many of you guys learned in your English class. And that is something that you can actually apply to your common approach statement. Not everything you learn in English class is useful, but metaphors actually are useful. And metaphors are an amazing framing device, especially if you are writing about multiple events. So right here, where we talked about event number one, event number two, event number three, they could be disconnected, but a good metaphor is what's going to connect all of these events and have a common thread or narrative through all of them that they all feel like part of one cohesive essay. So what could be a metaphor? Honestly, it can be anything. It can be an object. It can be a series of objects. For example, if we're talking about multiple events essay, your metaphor could be a pile of notes on your table, and maybe you're talking about how when you sit at your desk, you open that pile of notes, and every single note is from a certain memory or a certain interaction, and you walk the reader through multiple of these events, but then they all tie back to this metaphor of notes. It can be magnets on the fridge, it can be your favorite food, honestly, many different things. It can be an animal. I have read a few very cool essays about birds and how the student would compare themselves to a bird and talk about the values of freedom and like movement and adaptability and being in the moment. So honestly, a metaphor can be anything. And it can also be a letter S. Leave a plus in the chat if you have seen the viral letter S Harvard essay. It was all over the TikTok. It was such a beautiful essay. It was super creative. I mean, don't use the same letter S because I feel like by now a lot of people tried to copy it and it didn't work. But honestly, it's a pretty cool essay and it's a very good use of metaphor. Right? So again, metaphor can be anything as long as you are creative. The only two rules for metaphor. Number one is that it has to actually be present throughout the whole essay, right? If you open with a metaphor in the introduction, you better close your essay with a metaphor in the conclusion, right? You can't just leave it in the beginning and then move on and talk about other things. So metaphor has to be very consistent and present throughout the whole essay. And number two is that you genuinely want to evolve your metaphor together with your own personal development, right? Because I talked about the concept of you before and you after. You also want to have metaphor of you before and a metaphor of you after. So metaphor should be dynamic and not stable. And so letter S was actually a very good example of both of these. So the beginning of the essay was the following. I hate the letter S. Of 164,777 words with S, I only grapple with one. So this is the very first introduction. And again, it's an amazing hook, right? Because you're like, whoa, like what's wrong with the letter S? Why do you not like it? Like, what's the story? It's super creative. It's a great hook. And it does a great job introducing the metaphor of letter S. And then in the conclusion of her essay, she's talking about letter S, but in a new way, where she says, I stopped running away from a single S and began chasing a double S, passion. Passion has given me purpose. So again, you can see how the metaphor of letter S has evolved from single S, which represents the loss of a parent, to a double S, which represents passion. Again, we can see her progression from being lost and confused and sad to being someone with purpose and passion. And the metaphor of letter S is still present. So that's a beautiful example. And if you want to read the essay, I'm pretty sure you can Google and find it because it's been in many places. But yeah, if you are using a metaphor, please make sure that it's consistent throughout the whole essay and that it evolves together with you and your personality. Yeah, I think this is it on the theoretical part of the essay. And now I want to talk about how Borderless can help you with essays. And then I'm going to take a few of the questions. We still have about 10 minutes, so I'm sure I can answer a few. So who here has a subscription to our admissions guidance? Leave a reaction or leave a plus in the chat or raise your hand. Now, we have an amazing news for you guys is that now we provide common app essay reviews within this subscription that can do pretty cool things. It can provide the overall review as well as detailed comments. And by detailed comments, I mean it would literally highlight parts of the sentence and it would provide feedback about what the mistake is and how you can improve it. So both the overall and the detailed feedback is available for all of your Common App essays. And here are the criteria that we judge. First of all, uniqueness of the idea. So the AI will tell you if the idea is cliche or if it's quite unique and interesting. We will, of course, evaluate the show, don't tell rubric, and again, tell you if your essay has enough anecdotes and vivid details and sensory details, or if your essay relies on generalized statements, so you have room for improvement. Then we evaluate the depth of your reflection. So first of all, does your essay even have reflection? And two, is the reflection insightful and interesting and unique? Then we will evaluate structure and help you figure out if you have the good ratio of like challenge and overcoming challenge, and if it's just well connected, where the ideas are running smoothly, where there are connections between paragraphs, and if it's just easy to follow for a reader. Then we will comment on voice, whether it is authentic and appropriate for a college essay. We'll comment on readability and this issue of using fancy language and long sentences that no one can understand. And lastly, we evaluate grammar and language. So honestly, every single criteria of a good personal essay that I have mentioned, that is what the essay AI evaluates. And the best part is that it is instant. It is literally taking maybe like 5 to 10 seconds. And you can also do unlimited essay reviews. So if you have 100 drafts, you can submit 100 drafts. And every single draft would be reviewed instantly. And there's absolutely no limit to how much you want to review it. And another best part is that all of this is included in your current subscription, which is only $5 a month. And I know that originally we said that the essay review would be for extra fee because we expected a lot of development work and a lot of extra cost for our company. And it was still a lot of development work, but we're able to keep the cost very low. Because yeah, we really want this to be super affordable to absolutely everyone, even people who are seeking full financial aid and full scholarships and who cannot afford my services or other people's services. And I'll just bring it up that if you guys are interested in an essay review by me, I do provide it, and that would be on borderless.so/services. And my essay review are at a higher price because they are done by a human and my time is expensive because I have many things to do. But we also really wanted to provide extremely affordable option that is honestly accessible to anyone, because if you're applying to schools, you should have a little bit of budget because, I don't know, one CSS profile costs $25 and TOEFL costs like $160. So compared to that, I would say our subscription is basically free, given all that you get. And you can find it on borderless.so/app. And I'm just going to run through everything that the subscription has if you have not subscribed yet, but you should. First of all, we have College List Generator, which essentially recommends you colleges and scholarships based on your profile. And the list has all the links, application deadlines, average SAT scores, links for the scholarships, links for the financial aid, and it's specifically tailored for international students. So I know that many scholarships are only for domestic students, but we have manually sorted through a lot of data, and wherever is recommended, it is 100% applicable to international students. Then we also provide review of activities and also activity descriptions for the Common App, which is another very, very important part of the Common App application. We also help you generate passion project ideas. We also help you brainstorm Common App essay topics and help you write supplemental essays. So honestly, pretty much every single step that you need throughout this application process, we are covering, and all of that in unlimited use is included in your subscription. The one thing I just want to tell everyone is please get it today and not later, because we had a similar issue last year where people would subscribe like 2 days before the deadline, and then they realized that, oh, they need to rework their activity descriptions, or that they found a new college that they like, or they need to rewrite their essay, but they have like a few days or a couple of weeks. And that's when they just can't do anything because they don't have enough time. So now you still do have enough time, but you kind of need to rush. So just honestly, my honest advice to you is to please start right now to make sure that you're not just using the service, but you're actually improving your application based on the service feedback. So you can try for free. Every single tool is available to use once for free. So you can literally get your entire college list and scholarship list and essay review done in about next 5 minutes, and you don't have to pay anything and you don't have to put in your credit card. But if you do like it and if you use it more, then you can subscribe. And again, it would cost $5 for absolutely everything. There are no hidden fees. There is nothing else that we are charging. It is truly only $5. And you can also cancel at any time. And if you cancel, you will keep your subscription until the end of the paid month, and then you will not be charged anymore.